Your opponent gave a lengthy interview with the Chicago Sun-Times, and they've posted the whole video from that interview. And there were a couple of items of note that I wanted to play back for you and get your reaction to them. Some of them are a little, weird, and some of them are just, let's get into it. First of all, Natasha Korecki from the Sun-Times was asking the questions on behalf of the newspaper, and she asked Dick Durbin, who's been in Washington, as you point out often, a long time.
32 years.
32 years. Since 1982, he has been working in Washington, D.C. And Natasha Korecki asked Senator Durbin, said, looking back on your tenure in Washington, what would you hold up as your signature accomplishment? Your signature accomplishment. This is what he said.
Well, there are many things I've worked on over the years. I really believe that I focused earlier than most on the issue of tobacco and public health. The fact that for over 25 years, when you get on an airplane, smoking is prohibited was a law that I passed in the House of Representatives years ago.
So the senator says...
wow, single-handedly. Yes, he's done nothing since he's been in the Senate.
That's amazing.
It's a law that he passed, I guess, personally.
Unilaterally.
Unilaterally. But 32 years in 32 years in Washington, his number one achievement is something he did as a congressman, not as a senator. He's been the number two guy in the Senate for quite a while now. And it also is, listen, I think it's good. I think it's good. Listen, healthier, but of all the things in Washington, taxes, spending, he points to smoking and public health.
In the meantime, he's helped create an IRS code that is helping to drive companies out of this country, helping to make the economy grow at a much slower rate than what we really need to create more jobs and opportunities for people. Clearly, his accomplishments on the economic side have been to be very negative, have hurt the average Illinois family over the last 6 years. Our average income has declined by $5,053. I would like to see a senator from Illinois there who can stand up and say, hey, I helped get our economy going again. I helped create jobs. I helped make life better for people.
And another way of looking at it, too, I would think if you were in his position and had been there that long, people sent you there to represent them, their hopes, their desires, their needs, and all of that. You delivered non-smoking on airplanes to them.
I would hope
I'm seriously at a town hall. Who's the guy waving his arm in the back demanding that get first attention?
Probably the former smoker.
Probably.
Jim Oberweis with us here in studio. It's Riley Scot on WROK. To the Sun-Times interview once again. Natasha Korecki from the Sun-Times asking Senator Durbin about the IRS scandal and his letter that he wrote that said investigate Crossroads. Now, he gave his standard answer, which was, it wasn't them, it was I wanted everybody to be investigated, 501c3. But we know, and he told Chris Wallace last year, he said, listen, I wrote that letter because Karl Rove was the biggest name, spending the most money. I wanted him to be targeted because it was going to send a message to everybody else to cut this out, and that's why I targeted Karl Rove and Crossroads. Now his
story's changed a little bit.
His story's changed, but now he wanted everyone investigated, and it wasn't just Crossroads. It was just, so anyway.
That's so typical of Dick Durbin. Say whatever he needs to say to be politically popular at that point. The truth doesn't matter. It's what he thinks is the politically right thing to say.
So he gave that answer, and then he moved on to talking about the importance of the IRS scandal in this U.S. Senate race.
And I'll tell you this, if you picked out 100 people in Illinois and said, how much do you think this campaign should focus on an investigation 4 years ago of Karl Rove by the IRS? Couldn't find two. This is a dog whistle for the Tea Party Republicans. And Mr. Oberweis is running these ads to fire up his Tea Party base. And he can be my guest.
It's the kind of issue that got Richard Nixon impeached.
That's right.
Abuse of power by the IRS. And Dick Durbin says nobody cares about it, though he said, I think, in 3 years ago that it was a travesty, I believe was the word he used.
Again, this just shows how arrogant he has become and how distant he is from the voters of Illinois. As I've traveled around the state, we hear all the time from people who are concerned about that, who want answers to that. And I've called for a special prosecutor to look into that to try to get some answers. Mr. Durbin, who formerly was in favor of transparency, now has a little different take on that. We've asked for emails between Mr. Durbin and other members of the IRS around that period of time, and So far, he has not made those available. And unfortunately, Congress has exempted itself from FOIA so that we cannot demand those emails. I think when Congress passes a law, it ought to apply to everybody, not everybody except Congress. And when it comes to the IRS scandal, we need to get answers. And if the voters will be kind enough to send me to Washington, I will promise that I will do everything to make sure that we find out the answers and that we never allow this to happen again, where we have the IRS used as a political weapon against American families.
And a partial delineation there, too, is Nixon just considered it. This was actually done.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
there's a difference between I thought about pulling the trigger and I pulled the trigger. So I think the argument could be made really easily that this is worse.
As I've said many times, it was wrong when Richard Nixon did it. It's clearly wrong when Richard Durbin does it, and we need to put a stop to that. And the only way to do that is to send somebody different to Washington to replace him. He's just so removed. He doesn't talk to the people. He doesn't understand the people. He's become, a typical Washington insider. He's received over $9 million from lobbyists and special interest groups. That's what his focus is. How does he get more money in his campaign account? Not how do we help fix the problems of people in America.
Jim Oberweis with us. It's Riley Scot here on WROK. One more from the Sun-Times interview with Senator Durbin, Natasha Korecki, again doing the questioning. And this was a portion about you've received, at least that I know of, 3 prominent African-American pastors in Chicago who have previously supported Senator Durbin have come out and endorsed your campaign this time around. And they've said it's for a number of reasons: economic policy, the fact that they have never even met Senator Durbin during his time in office. Natasha Korecki from the Sun-Times asked Senator Durbin about the support of some African-American pastors for your campaign. His response:
There have been 2 notable members of African-American ministers who've come forward to endorse my opponent. There are thousands, at least hundreds, in the city of Chicago. These 2 have come forward, and it's a novelty that an African-American minister is going to endorse publicly a Republican candidate for the Senate. One of them said it's because of Oberweis's views on economic development. I would like a chance to speak to that minister and even his congregation about my viewpoint.
2 points.
First chance that he's had for 32 years that he hasn't taken advantage of.
Many opportunities to do that.
That's the reason I left that last part on, because when the pastors announced their support for you, one of the reasons is they had never talked to Senator Durbin during his years and years in Washington.
And they've told me that neither he nor his office even bothered to respond to their inquiries.
Yeah, but now he'd like the opportunity.
Yep.
Secondly, when you talk to the pastors, they see this as a novelty. They're going to get some attention, some press over the fact they're endorsing your campaign.
They consider themselves novelties?
First of all, it isn't 2, it's now 3 major endorsements, and I believe there are more to come. This is just further evidence that Mr. Durbin is so far removed from people that he doesn't understand what they're talking about and what's going on in their community. They need more jobs, and to get more jobs, they need better education for their kids. And let me tell you, school choice, which creates competition between schools, is the best opportunity on the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago to get a better education for those kids. I've been a strong supporter of school choice and merit pay for teachers, but guess what? The bosses of the NEA don't like school choice. They don't like competition. They like to have a monopoly in their own world. And for that reason, they have encouraged Mr. Durbin to kill a school choice program in Washington, D.C., which was a great pilot program for minority kids and all kids in Washington, D.C., and Mr. Durbin dutifully followed through and got the program killed. When people on the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago in the African-American community begin to understand where Mr. Durbin's loyalties have been and what he has done, they get pretty angry about that. And I think they're beginning to understand that the best thing they can do is have competition among the Republican Party and the Democrat Party to try to listen to their issues, understand their issues, propose the best solutions to those issues so that they can get some positive response. Now, again, when one party has a total control over those votes and the Democrats could take those votes for granted, they didn't have to work to come up with good solutions that would help the community. If they vote partly Republican and partly Democrat, if they vote for the candidate that they think is best, and regardless of whether that candidate is a Republican or a Democrat, they're going to get more responsiveness from both Republicans and Democrats and have better opportunities for solutions to their problems. But school choice is a perfect example of the arrogance of Dick Durbin, where he doesn't care about the good for the community, he only cares about himself. And when it comes to those pastors, let me just say, that was a very courageous thing for them to do, to stand up and break the tradition that's been going on. Reverend Ackery has been not only a supporter of Dick Durbin in the past, he's been a Democrat activist in the city of Chicago. For him to take that position is very courageous. The same thing for Pastor Brooks and for Bishop Trotter. It took a lot of courage to stand up, and I think you're going to see some more pastors following through. And I don't know what Mr. Durbin will say if another 10 or 15 or 20 pastors happen to believe in the same things that those pastors do.
Well, I'm just kind of curious as how it is you could look those pastors in the eye or their congregation in the eye and bemoan along with them the state of the schools that their kids are forced to go to at the same time when you walk out the door, slamming the door on any chance of them getting their kids someplace else.
Riley, not to worry. He's never looked them in the eye.
Which is one of their chief complaints. Yes, well said.
Jim Oberweis with us here, Riley and Scott on WROK. I want to close with this. Senator Durbin, a couple of times in the past year, 18 months or so. Well, backtrack a second. Earmarks. Earmarks are gone. It's one of the few ways, or it's one of the ways we've had a modicum of spending restraint in Washington, is getting rid of the earmarks, the horse trading, the bridge to nowhere in Alaska. And Dick Durbin says earmarks must return to Washington because that's how things get done. You give me this, I get that. We'll give you those things. All of a sudden, spending bills balloon, and that's how we get this out-of-control spending in Washington. But Dick Durbin says they've got to come back. Earmarks have to come back, he says. Is there any way you would support that maneuver?
In a word, no. I mean, look, there's plenty of pork that still goes on in Washington. We need to work on reducing that. But the idea that we have to have more pork and more spending is absolutely, once again, it just shows how removed Dick Durbin is from the people of Illinois. As I travel around the state of Illinois and talk to hundreds and thousands of people, I got to tell you, I have never heard one person say, hey, please bring back earmarks. Please bring back, we need more pork. I'm sure somewhere there's somebody who would have a special project that they would like to see, and they would be happy to see that come back. But I'll tell you, they're not talking about it publicly.
I was going to say, he talks about stopping people and asking them about something. You stop 10 people on the street and ask them to define an earmark for you.
Yeah, that's true.
Like one of them gauges? You put, no. Financially speaking, no, I'm not really sure what that is. But yeah, we definitely want to bring those back because that's how we get things done in Washington.
That's his solution to our
more
mess
spending.
in Washington.
Again, the Dick Durbin solution to something in Washington is more spending, more pork, more earmarks.
He just does not understand basic economic principles of how we've got to organize things so that businesses want to grow, they want to stay here in Illinois, and they want to stay in the United States, and they want to create more jobs and opportunities for people and get that virtuous economic cycle going again.
What haven't we asked you about? What do you want people to know that they ought to here?
Well, I think that, the common sense answer is that Dick Durbin, having been in Washington for 32 years, that's just too long. He's lost touch with the people of Illinois. It's time for a change. The only way to really make a change is to change the person that we send to Washington to listen to some fresh ideas. And if the voters choose to send me to Washington, and if the voters happen to choose to elect Bruce Rauner as our new governor of Illinois, I think the prospects for Illinois will look very different. We'll have a little bit more balance. We'll have balance in Springfield with a Republican governor and a Democrat-controlled Congress. We'd have balance in Washington with a Republican-controlled Congress and a Democrat-controlled executive side. So I think frequently we get the best results for our people when we have that type of balance between the two political parties.
And you're also in town for a fundraiser at Giovanni's today. Hope people stop out and see you there, right? That's open and available?
We'd certainly love to have people join us. I believe it's at 5:30. You can check with the restaurant to be sure. And we do ask for a small contribution to the campaign to help us get our message out so that voters all across the state understand the difference in objectives between Mr. Durbin and myself.
Jim, thanks a lot for taking time to come in with us this morning. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, Riley, and Scott, thank you.